Hi guys. Oh, I'm taking that back. Hi guys. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session is on color enhancement and preservation. Guys in the room, mute your mics. I can hear feedback. Color enhancement and preservation in Photoshop, presented by Hytham. But before we go into that, we have a few things I wanted to go over. First things first, we still have T-shirts, and if you're wondering what they look like, I've got mine on right now. Hopefully that's not reversed for you. It's reversed for me, but yeah, we still have T-shirts. Send me, if you guys want one, $25 will get you one. Send me on Google Plus or go to our website, to our contact form. Send me your info, and I'll get you all hooked up. As well, our image of the week, and I am again going to show you the image of the week from our website. If I click over to it. Because our image of the week is actually by Josh, and it's not an astro image, but Josh can go into it a little bit. I'm going to have to keep it here. Josh, you're welcome to talk about it if you're in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. So just so everyone knows, we've done some Star Party wrap-ups in the past, and I think instead of having a separate show for every Star Party, maybe we'll do like one show a year kind of to wrap up all the Star Parties that we attended. But so this time we're going to kind of just do a short one on the Winter Star Party and do it over the image of the week. But first, before I talk too much about it, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody out at the Winter Star Party who helped organize it, because it was just an awesome event again. I really enjoyed going there. Charlie, Chuck, and Tim, and many others. Also, the kitchen down there was just awesome too. So the Star Party started off as what was going to be questionable weather. It was kind of calling for clouds and cold weather for a lot of the week, and the first few days were cloudy. It wasn't rainy, but it was cloudy and it was cold, and there wasn't much astronomy going on the first few nights. So a lot of people headed into town after they got set up and went over to Key West and enjoyed themselves. But by Wednesday night, we had a partially clear night, and then the last few nights of the party were they were really nice. A little chilly, but really good for astronomy, and it turned out to be just a fantastic party. And so for anybody who doesn't know about the Winter Star Party, it's held in February every year down in the Florida Keys. And when I say it was a little bit cold there, this year it was maybe in the 50s at night. It might have gotten down into the 40s one night, but by the end of the week it was in the mid to high 70s and really sunny and just gorgeous outside, very warm. And so this party, I have only been to 2 of them, but it's always got a great atmosphere. And as you can see, it's actually located on what is a very kind of narrow and short key where they have a Girl Scout and Boy Scout camp, and there's no other structures on that little key. So it's actually pretty dark. It's not as dark as maybe some other Star Parties, but it's still quite dark. The Milky Way is just plain as day in the middle of the night. And it's kind of right next to Big Pine Key and Isla Morada. So anyways, I think there's usually somewhere between 300, 400 people, maybe. I think there were 460 people registered this year. It didn't appear that maybe that many people were there all at once, but there's usually a full week of good presentation scheduled up in the wheelhouse. Good vendors. I met quite a few really nice guys in the vendor area, including the guys from Camera Concepts. Howie Glatter was there. Olivon from Chuck Pizzo was there, who was also very friendly. And then Infinities. I met Dirk, who runs Infinities, and he's out at Okie-Tex and Neef and a bunch of other Star Parties, and he has really great astronomy-themed T-shirts, as well as makes the shirts for a lot of the Star Parties, and they're really, really nice shirts. So anyways, it was just great walking around. As I always say about Star Parties when I talk on here, they're probably the best thing to go to if you enjoy astronomy. It's a good way to kind of get away for a week and kind of devote yourself totally to astronomy and just see what everyone's doing. If you're an astro imager, then there's all kinds of big Dobbs and big refractors out there, and for us who are into astro imaging, you probably don't look through them very often, and it's definitely a treat. You can see over there, I think it was a pair of 180s, and I'm not sure what the make was of those scopes, but a pair of 180s made into viewers that were beautiful. I got to walk around. I saw some Paramount MX, Paramount Mighty, a couple of AP 3600s, 1200s, 1100s, Tech 180s, AP 160 or 155s, and just everything. It was cool to do that and kind of compare the gear. So, anyways, it was, like I said, it was just a great experience, and thanks to everyone who hosted the party down there.
Awesome, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's so sorry about that screen there. Ooh. Yeah, I saw those that looked like 180s. Pretty cool looking. Love to get a view through them. Okay, so I see a bunch of people are in the room. I am going to hand it right over to Hytham. Hytham, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome.
The room is yours.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for having me here again, everyone. I really appreciate it. So today's presentation is just strictly about, as the title states, it's about color enhancement and color preservation within Photoshop. I haven't shaded up my desktop just yet, and I will do so here in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to state up front that what is this presentation about? What is it not about? Now, everyone gets into huge philosophical debates when it comes to color. What's right? What's wrong? Is it proper to be more vibrant? Is it more appropriate to be or to create the object so that it looks like what you would see as you're viewing it through a telescope? I'm not here to tell you that at all. I'm just simply here to show you some different tips and some tricks and some enhancements that can be leveraged within Photoshop to create an image that you find pleasing for yourself. I am not at all going to tell you that just because an object was imaged with a particular wavelength of color that it must look exactly like X. We're not here to do that. We're not going to get into that. So what I'm going to do is here I'm going to just share out my desktop here for you guys, and let's just do full screen. And please let me know if you see Photoshop here in front of you.
I do see Photoshop, and I'm going to interrupt you for one sec. I see one comment, cannot get into the live feed. Would someone type into Q&A whether you can actually see me? In the meantime, I'm going to let Hytham take it back. I think we're fine, though. I think they got in. Okay, great. So as stated, we're not going to get into what is right and what is wrong. I'm not going to tell you what's right, what's wrong. As I stated, everybody loves different things. Everybody is going for an entirely different goal. I'm the type of guy that prefers to have big, bright, vibrant, colorful images because that is just simply my perception of the universe and how I personally like to envision it. If you're an individual that likes to have something that's a little bit more toned down, and as I said earlier, that is a representation of what you see from an eyepiece within a telescope, that is also equally great. We're not going to get into philosophical differences here. The next thing that I'm going to do here is I want to show everybody a couple of images that I have used these particular techniques on. Now, the images themselves do have some similarities, and those similarities are the type of equipment that has been used, as well as the location of where they were taken. And when I say location, it's necessarily just talking about the darkness of the skies, not necessarily the geographical location. So a couple of examples here. This is my latest image here on the screen. It's IC2118. Traditionally, you don't see a whole lot of red in the background in some of these images. I was able to highlight the reds just by using these specific techniques and tricks. This is another one of these images where I leveraged the exact same techniques to bring out a lot of the color. As you can see, in every single one of these images, they tend to be a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more colorful. Again, that's what I like. But one thing that I do want to state right off the bat is do not judge the efficacy of this technique based on the images that you are seeing here in front of you. Of course, there are a number of factors. Again, the very first thing that I've hit on several times already is subjectivity as to what you like and what you prefer. The second big thing that we never ever seem to take into consideration is what are you using to view these images? Are you looking at it from your phone? Are you looking at it from your desktop? Are you using a TN panel? Are you using an IPS panel? Are you using calibrated monitor or a non-calibrated monitor? Now, I'm fortunate enough to have two monitors in front of me that are calibrated, so they look very similar, and I have a
a humble brag moment here, a third monitor that I use for gaming, and when I move it over to that one monitor, it looks entirely different. The colors are washed out, they're far more muted, there's a lot of contrast that is missing within the image itself. So the other thing that these images here have in common is that the amount of integration time that they tend to hover anywhere between 10 to about 18 hours of exposure. The image that we're going to look at here today, which is IC2118, has 18 hours of exposure. I have 9 hours of luminance and then additional 9 hours of RGB. But individually, it's 3 hours apiece. These are 20-minute subs for luminance, 15 minutes apiece for RG and B. I tend to like to expose a little bit longer to capture as much signal as possible, and my system allows me to do so. That may or may not work for you, fully dependent upon, of course, you're seeing your equipment that you have on hand. Now, the reason why I'm telling everybody why I'm using or what integration lengths I'm using and what these images are composed of is that you don't necessarily need to capture tons and tons of data in order to get great color or good color, what you perceive as good or great color. This image here is an example of that. If anyone were to guess off the top of your head by looking at the color on your screen, how many hours you would think. So this image here was captured in a very dark sky using a Takahashi FSQ106 with a 16803 chip, but the integration times were significantly lower. We're talking about a total of 160 minutes of luminance data. That's, of course, I'm using that to capture the detail. But the individual RGB wavelengths are incredibly short. We're talking about 6 by 5 minutes apiece. So 6 by 5 minutes apiece, that's 30 minutes each in each color wavelength for a total of 90 minutes worth of color using 5-minute exposures. Now again, of course, now dependent upon the skies, your location you're seeing, your transparency, the equipment that you're using, it's going to end up having an impact. But the point that I'm making here is that using these very, very simple techniques, you can still get excellent color from your images. And it's just a matter of being able to take your time. So with that said, let's close out some of these images because I come home only to find out that I lost 16 gigs of RAM, so I don't want to keep all these images open and absolutely destroy it. So before I dive on into it, do we have any questions, comments, anything from anyone here in the room or from outside in the YouTube world before we really dive on in?
Nothing yet, but remember, out there in YouTube world, you have Q&A that you could type in. Actually, if you're in the Google Hangout, as opposed to watching us on YouTube.
Awesome. So when I first started working through this presentation and thinking of what am I going to do, how am I going to do this, and I was talking to a couple of people, and honestly, this whole thing would have taken me about 20 minutes to do, even with a little bit of pontificating and some oxygen pirating. I got it to about 35 minutes. So what I decided to do is just change the format just a wee bit. Now you'll see here what I've done is I've got a number of different groups that are in this image, and each one of them is labeled accordingly with the steps that I took as we go through the image. So what I'm going to do is show you everyone out there, both ladies and gentlemen, that the steps that I go through to take, how do I bring out this detail, but how do I still preserve the color in the stars as well as the nebulosity in the background. If at any point you get lost, please do not hesitate to ask a question. I'm happy to answer them as we move along, because if I get rolling, I will not stop. So how do we take this luminance image, this RGB image, and how do we turn it into a result such as the one that we have here on our screen? Well, as we understand that, when we take an image and we start to stretch it out, we begin to highlight or sort of brighten the number of those pixels within that image. Now, depending on where they fall within this histogram that you see up here towards the top right, these are the pixels that are going to contain certain amounts of information. Now, the histogram itself is broken up into 3 different areas. You have your shadows, typically on this end of the scale. You have your midtones, which of course fall in the middle, and then you have your highlights, which fall towards the end of the histogram here. As we brighten that image and we start to brighten those pixels, we start to lose a lot of the color information. So how do we go about doing it? Now, one of the very first things that I did when I first started this is that I would take this image here and so a luminance image, and I would process it fully to completion, and then try to apply it to an RGB image. And the result was always something that was muted. The colors were not very good. They weren't very bright. You know, from my point of view, I did not like them. I was never very happy with the end result. So I started looking at different ways of doing this. Now, before I go into it and start explaining where I learned this, I did not learn this technique from astro imaging processing at all. I learned this from, I do landscape photography on the side, and happened to come across a video that talked about color enhancement, and it just triggered a light bulb in my brain. Why am I not using this technique to be used in astro imaging? So the very first step here, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to only talk about the shortcuts. If I do mention shortcuts, they are Windows specific only. They are not going to be Mac, so I apologize to all the Mac users out there. If at some point I come back to do it, I'll be more than happy to provide that for you. So we'll start off with this image, and the first thing we want to do, of course, is do a Control Y. And the reason why I do a Control Y, and what a Control Y allows you to do, it just automatically it adds your proofing setup here. So I have mine set to custom, and it just applies the ICC profile of your monitor to the image that you're working on. So if you have a calibrated monitor, you just simply go into custom, you go into device to simulate, and then you select the profile that you have created, and you bring it up. So Control Y will either turn it on or off. So that's the first thing I want to do, because I want to get a good, accurate representation of what we want. Now, I want to grab my luminosity image, which is just a Control A. To copy it is a Control C. And let's move over to the RGB image. And we do a Control V inside the RGB image. So what this has done now is taken the luminosity image and it's converted into a color space. Because as soon as you add it to another image or to the base layer that contains color information, that information is then inherited by the layer above. So we can, I'll just leave that open. Next step, we just convert this over to a luminosity, and you can see right away what happens. Something I should touch on, and I apologize for not hitting on this. I actually made a really big mistake with this luminosity image. It is way too bloody bright. I do all of my initial calibration within PixInsight, my initial stretching within PixInsight before I carry everything into Photoshop for all of my color enhancements and my detail enhancement. I do bounce around quite a bit for this presentation. I will not be doing that. But I stretch this image way too much to begin with. This is far, far too bright. What I typically like to do is try to keep the images nice and dark like this, as you can see with the RGB layer, because I want to preserve as much as that color information as possible. Don't stretch it too far. This, what you see here on your screen, is wrong. Don't do that. But I'm going to show you that even if you do make a mistake, you can still retain that color and enhance it as you move forward. So we bring this over, and as I showed you, we just do a copy paste, and you can see immediately as soon as we set this to a luminosity layer, we lose a lot of that color information. It's already gone. So the very first thing I want to do is, how do I bring that color back? How do I retain that color? Now, there are a couple of different steps that you can take. The very first simple one, let me just do a quick rename here, and then here, so that we can see this. There's a very, very simple technique. The very first thing that you can simply do is just add a vibrance or adjustment layer right above your RGB layer here. And you can just make a simple, let me move this. You can just simply just drag the saturation slider up. This is one of the easiest ways of doing it. Now, of course, you can do additional things such as you can put a mask here, because this is a show all mask. Anything that shows as white, reveal all black, hide all. So this is the simplest of steps. You can absolutely do it this way. By doing this, you highlight, or sorry, you saturate every single one of the pixels in the image, including, let's do a Control 1 here. So Control 1 will bring it up to 100%. Then using Control plus, you can zoom in further. It's going to highlight, and I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but what it's going to do, again, I keep saying highlight when I should be saying saturate, it's going to saturate every single pixel in this way. Now, by doing so, you're also going to bring out a lot of chrominance noise. Not the best and most effective way. Now, of course, what you can do is you can go up to your luminosity layer if you want, do a Control A, Control C, select your vibrance layer. Now, in order to get into the vibrance layer, is you hold down your Alt key, left click, and it gives you your working image, and then you can paste that luminosity image to be used as a mask if you wanted to do that. Now, by doing so, what we do is we can take a look at what it's highlighting, or saturating, when it's saturating. And if we have a close look, and I'm not sure people can see this here on your screens, but by doing so, we're only highlighting the areas that are exposed, and anything that is darker will not be subject to saturation. So it's a very, very simple first step. Nothing groundbreaking about this. Now, if you didn't know about it before, please don't feel bad, but this is a very common technique, and I think people in PixInsight use something very similar, where they do a pre-saturation prior to combination. This is one way of doing it. You can absolutely leverage this method if you'd like. The other way of doing it, whoops, went back a little too far there. We'll go back to here. The other way of doing it is you can use destructive techniques. Now, there are two different kinds of ways that you can make changes to images within Photoshop. Now, as I just showed you, you can use an adjustment layer, which doesn't make permanent destructive changes to an image, because you're only making those changes to this layer here. And what's great about that, it gives you the ability, and if you wanted to, you can create a grouping out of this one. So by doing a Control-G, so you can highlight that layer, Control-G, and it automatically creates a group. And that way you can go back to that group, and you can bring it up and down, or sorry, view it, make it visible, or make it invisible, so that way you can see the changes that are made, and you can go back to the adjustment layer to make changes later on. That's one method.
Hytham?
Yes?
Josh is asking, what is the difference between coloring a luminosity image and looming a color image, if there is one? And I don't know if you know the answer to that. I don't.
I'm sorry, could you ask that? Is that in the Q&A? So what's the difference between
coloring a luminosity image and looming a color image?
Looming a color image?
So in other words, I believe you have your RGB on the bottom and you have a luminosity layer on top. And I think, I don't know, Josh probably does it the other way around. I'm guessing that's it.
Well,
Josh,
so once in a while, I will, if I've gone too far with my luminosity, I'll bring back in my color image on top of that and use it to colorize it. So. Oh,
I see. So you create like a color adjustment layer on top of the luminosity layer.
Right. So I don't know what the difference is between adding your luminosity grayscale image on top of your color as a luminosity layer, or adding your color image on top of your luminosity as a color layer.
Okay, so I've used that sort of technique in the past where I've wanted to highlight very specific details and or colors in an image that I just made modifications to. So a perfect example was I was working on an individual's image over on CN, Goofy. He goes by the name of Goofy, and it was his veil nebula. And one of the things over top of the veil is there's this gorgeous red veil that highlights or accentuates the upper portion of the nebula itself. And what I wanted to do was bring in that color difference into the image, because I did not make any changes to everything else. So when you bring in that image and you put it on top of a layer and you simply change it here to the blending mode to color right down here at the bottom, what it's going to do is it's going to force the image that is below it to inherit the colors that it has, so the differences between the two, and it brings that to the forefront. So any of the color data, not detail, that exists within the image will be then highlighted in the image below. That's the only way I've used it. If anyone else has another explanation, I'm more than happy to hear it, but that's the way I have personally used that particular blending method. Josh, is that typically what you have seen, is that in order to bring some of that color back, by setting it to color, just helps bring that color back to the forefront?
Yep, that's how I use it. I don't actually know technically what it does, but it seems like that works, and then so I'll mask off the regions that I really wanted to impact. So it may darken it up a little bit, which is expected since it's kind of making the difference.
Yeah, that's precisely, and that's how I tend to use it as well. I use it as a color layer to enhance the color as well. I'm not going to talk about that here in this particular chat, but it's definitely something we can throw in for a later presentation because it's a little bit more, I guess, advanced. So the other method here, okay, so as I was stating, so we talked about using an adjustment layer and how it is non-destructive. But if we use something like a image adjustments, and you go to an HDR toning or shadows and highlights, it is known as a destructive method. Now, I got into a bit of an argument with one of my close friends this weekend about the use of shadows and highlights and how to use it. There are two different ways that one can leverage it. So I'll show you the very first way and how I like to use it. And this is one of the little tricks that I learned in landscape photography and from a very good friend of mine who is a graphics designer that knows Photoshop inside and out. So what you could do is if you go to, so important note here, make sure you have your RGB layer selected. So you select your RGB layer, you go to Image, you go to Adjustments, you select your Shadows and Highlights tool. Now one of the things that if you didn't notice what happened right away, it might be a little bit difficult to see. So let's zoom in here using Control+. Oops. Is that as soon as I turn this on or brought the Shadows and Highlights utility forward, the color immediately changed. So here's a preview. Here's before, and here's after. So again, before and after. So there is a change in color immediately. I did absolutely nothing. Now to bring the image back to normal viewing resolution on your desktop, it's just a Control-0. So it takes you back to fit the image within your screen. And even at this layer here, at this level, you can see that there's some changes. There's some blue that comes in. Now something that you may have not noticed in the past is that in a lot of the image, you'll see that the witch head is not as blue. Mine seems to be extraordinarily blue, and I did some research about that this weekend because I thought it was incredibly wrong. So there's a lot of blue detail. There's a lot of reflection nebula here in this area. So it brings out a lot of the blues down here. So if we bring it again, you can see a lot of blues. It highlights some of the reds, and you can see some of this nice fainter dust in the background. Also gets some additional red coloring added to it. So this is known as a destructive change, because once I apply this change to the image, I can't go back and make changes to it. So in order for us to do that, you have to convert the RGB layer into what is known as a smart object. It is nothing new. I've known about this for quite some time. I just don't use it. Let's just say it's out of laziness, but it's incredibly intelligent to use it. So what I like to do is prior to moving into starting making these color adjustments and changes to the RGB layer, we can create, and I'll just disable the luminance layer, or luminosity layer. Let's create a copy. So in order to create a copy, you just do a simply Control-J, and it creates a copy right above it. Let's rename this to S and H, so Shadows and Highlights. And I want to right-click on this. So when you right-click on it, it gives you an option to convert it to what is known as a smart object. So what this gives me the ability to do is that I can always go back and I can make changes to that layer when it's a smart object. So click on Smart Object. Takes a second. It's now converted over to a smart object. Now, so what this gives me the ability to do, if we go back to Image, Adjustments as I stated, go to Shadows and Highlights, and sorry everybody, bring that back up. Go back to Image, Adjustments. I wish there was a shortcut for that. At least I wish I knew there was one. And you can make the changes here and go back to it. So what I first do is I don't touch the highlights. I don't do it. I never even look at them. I use shadows and the adjustment area down here, color correction and the mid-tone contrast. So by making changes to shadows, and as I told you guys at the very beginning, the histogram is broken up into 3 different sections. You have your shadows, your midtones, and your highlights. What we're doing here is we're messing around with just the shadows portion of it, so the bottom 1/3 of the image. Now if I take this slider and I begin to move it up, there is a huge amount of change when it comes to color. And it's significant. So we can move it here. Let's exaggerate it, bring it down. So you can see how it gets muted if you take it all the way down to 0%. But as we bring it up and we brighten that bottom layer, you see the color begins to change significantly. Now if you're watching right down here, and I'll show everyone this in a moment, but you can see the changes that are made to the image itself. So you can see that it goes extremely dark because we're completely removing all shadows. But as we're bringing this up, we're brightening the shadows, and this brightens the color image here. So it has a significant impact. Now, something that might come to people's mind is, well, what's right? How much is right? Well, you got to eyeball it. You don't want to add so much color to an image, and this is just my personal opinion, again, that you get to the point where you oversaturate the image and you start losing detail. And if you start losing detail, in my opinion, you've gone way too far with it. And we don't want to do that. We want to be able to color the image, color those pixels, retain that information without destroying all of the other information. As I said, I spent 18 hours collecting this data. I am not about to butcher it. At least in my eyes, I am not about to butcher it. So the next adjustment that you can do from here is you can make adjustments to the color correction, because as you brighten those pixels, you start to lose color information if you go too far with it. So what we want to do is use a color correction slider here, and you begin to slide this up. Now by doing this, you can see I'm exaggerating by going to plus 100 to really show you the impact, is that it acts as a saturation adjustment. So if I brighten pixels, I need to recover some of that color information. So by doing so, it starts off at a default of plus 20 or so. We want to bring it up a little bit. And I don't want to push it too far. And if I push it too far, again, like I said, we start losing detail. The other slider here is you have your mid-tone contrast. Now, if you're familiar with Lightroom and or Adobe Camera Raw is the other one, and there's another product known as Affinity Photo that is for Mac, and I think they have it. If they do not, sorry. This acts as your clarity slider, which is just a mid-tone contrast and enhancement, and you can see the impact that this will have on your image is that by adding more contrast, you can get more color. I tend to not touch this very often, especially in color images, colorful images such as this one where it looks like a clown puked all over my computer. I leave it alone. I don't want to push it too far. So if we select, I think I went a little too far here. Let's look at the before and after. I like this as a nice, strong color layer. I don't want to go any further than this. So let's select OK. And this is where you get to see the power of a smart object. Now, if I had made this change the first time around, it's, as I stated, it's destructive. You cannot go back to make those changes again. It's done. It's over. It is finished. So this gives me the ability, by selecting, just hovering here over the shadows and highlights, double-click, and there you go. You can come back and make those adjustments. So it has been converted into a smart object, which allows you to use those non-layer utilities or non-adjustment layer utilities to go back and make changes to. Other examples are Gaussian blur is another perfect example. So with that, are there any questions out there? Have I flown past anything that people are wondering about?
I don't see any new questions. I'll just say to Tim, I just checked. The live feed is working on my computers, so you should be able to get it. I don't know if it's a bug in your computer, but it's working for me on my end.
Okay, excellent. So that is the very first step that I like to do, is let's create a base color. Now what I'm going to do here is let's just disable the luminance layer so you can see what it looks like. It is bright, it's kind of gross looking. If we go to Control 1, which will give us 100% view, and let's go even further. Let's be one of those annoying pixel peepers, which I do to myself all the bloody time. And if we go zoom in, we're at about 300, 400% here at this point. You can see how much noise it has brought to the forefront. That's not good. We brighten images. We spend all this time gathering so much data to decrease the noise, only to come back and increase it. Kind of sucks. It's no fun. So Control 0 to bring it back to the full screen. To the fit screen mode. The next thing that we want to do here is, how do we fix this? So I want to create a new layer. Now before we move into starting to add additional contrast and details and enhancements, my goals are to use the color layer for color. One thing I never stated in the previously is that my luminance layer was integrated. This is a super luminance image. I've been using it quite a bit. Is what you do is you'd end up taking your RG and B, integrate it directly with your luminance to create a super luminance. This has multiple advantages. Of course, it increases SNR because you're integrating the total amount of data from both your RGB and as well as your luminance into a single super luminance image. So it gives me an incredibly nice, smooth image to work with. So in this case, I don't really care about the detail that is in the RGB layer. So my next thing I want to do is I'll create a new layer, and in Windows you do a Control-Shift-N for a new layer. Now I like to rename every single one of my layers. So I call this the Gaussian, let's call it Gaussian blur. Now what we do here is, I learned this, and this was like groundbreaking for me, is stamp visible. And if you're not familiar with what a stamp visible is, you just take all the layers that are previously and you just apply it to the top. So all the changes that have been made below, you create a new layer with that change. So you do this by a Control-Shift-Alt-E for echo, and you create a new layer here called Gaussian blur. So it took the shadows and highlights application and added it to the top here. So as I stated before, this is now a destructive. If I go into filter, blur, you'll notice right away that it does not create a brand new adjustment layer. It is a destructive process. So by clicking in the box here, left-clicking back and forth, you can see the changes that it makes. Now you have the choice. You can just either add this just as a Gaussian blur as it is and leave it as a destructive layer, or you can come back and make changes. Now, depending on the amount of noise in here, I like to vary it between about 1 to about 3-ish pixels or so. I don't like to go much further, so I decided on 2.5 here as I was messing around. Let's just create this, convert this over to a smart object quickly. Go back to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, set it to 2.5, and now we have our blur applied to the enhanced color image below. Now let's bring up our luminous image here. So you can see the differences already from start to finish. So if we go to here, there we go. And let's get that one enabled. So this is where we started off with, and this is where we're ending up. So you can see just between those two, my gosh, what is my brain? There we go, name change. So from name change down to Gaussian blur, you can see the difference in color without any loss of detail. And of course, one thing that you are going to note is that I am blending at an opacity of 100. I never, ever, ever blend my luminance anything less than 100. I don't want to lose all that time and effort that I spent collecting all that data. So I want to retain as much as possible. Now, what I like to do is highlight both of those, do a Control-G, and we have our new grouping. Sorry, and I didn't say this, but you just select the individual image, you use Shift to select, Control-G automatically dumps them into a group, and we can call this one the color enhancement. To start with. So any questions so far just regarding what has been done, what's been completed thus far?
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So typically when you're bringing in your loom, your star sizes aren't necessarily exactly the same as your color.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do special to deal with that? Because oftentimes what I'll face is that the color stars might want to have a little bit of a halo around the brighter, smaller loom stars if you have them well controlled, or the other way around where you might get kind of a white halo around a colored star.
Yeah, so that's fun. That's where it gets really, really difficult. So matching up star sizes, especially between luminance and RGB, is probably everyone's, and I see it in everyone's, including my own images. You know, this is by no means when I criticize other people, it's because I've seen all of those errors in mine, and it's something that I see in myself that I do quite a bit. Now, to adjust for it, what I like to do typically is try to get the images to match up as close as possible. What I like to do is an auto histogram stretch and in PixInsight prior to bringing my images into it and trying to keep the stars as close as possible to the same. So what that gives me the ability to do, depending on the algorithm you select, I like to use a, let me see off the top of my head, I think it's a logarithmic transform is what it's called. It helps control the size of the stars as I'm stretching the images to bring them to a point that I want and try to match them up. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not so successful, and it requires me to go back and blur the outer halo by using a Gaussian blur on the stars itself to reduce that oversaturated look. What do you tend to do, Josh?
I don't know. I don't think I found something that I'm completely happy with, but a lot of times I'll use a star mask. I'm not like you. I don't use luminosity all the time at 100%, but I'll usually use luminosity at 100%, but mask out the stars so that I'm not worrying about those, and then I'll treat the stars separately and use masking. So I might use the RGB stars as a mask for my loom stars to make sure that they're just letting in that amount of light, or the other way around.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. The other method that I'd like to use is, you know, as I'm stretching the images, I will use star masks in between the two and just try to control the sizes that way. The big thing is, again, it all comes down to saturating and how much you're pushing that saturation and just being careful and just trying to keep your eye on those if you want to do so. Anything else?
That was my question. I
Okay.
think it's one of the toughest things to retain color, but have it be the same size star.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's a giant pain in the butt. I don't like to go back because I like what I call myself is just a lazy processor. I always look for the quickest and fastest way to process an image without spending days and days and days at a time without having to overly obsess with it. Sometimes it comes back to bite me in the butt pretty hard. So I created a new group, and now the next thing I want to do is, so what do we need to do here next? So if we go back over to my image here, take a look at this luminance image, and I create what I call is a screen adjustment layer. So a screen adjustment layer gives you the ability to highlight some detail in an image. Now, if you're not too familiar with screen and how it works and what it does, screen just takes all the pixels, brightens them up, and brings a lot of the faint detail in the background. So to create a new layer, we just do a Control-J, and let's set it to screen right away. And you can see what happens here. Because I have left this as a layer at the very top, it is going to impact everything else that is below it. Now, I don't want that because I simply want to attack the luminance layer, the luminosity layer. So by selecting it, hold down your Alt key. When you hold down your Alt key and just hover it ever so slightly right here on the edge, it gives you the ability to create what is known as a clipping mask, and you can see it here brought up in our history. So we create what is known as a clipping mask, and a clipping mask just simply impacts or affects the layer that is directly beneath it without impacting every other single layer that impacts it. The other way you could do it is, so if we do a Control-Z, that did not work for me. All right, fine, don't do that. Oh, there it did. Okay. Control-Z, we just take it back to here. You can also just do a right-click on there. And did I mess that up? Where'd it go? There it is. Create clipping mask. So don't right-click directly on there. Just right-click on the space there. Just create a clipping mask. So we do let's disable these two. Do a Control-A. Just select all. Control-C to copy. Now you can go right down here. We select a reveal all mask. And remember what I said previously, hold down your Alt key, left click to get in the mask, Control-V. Now we want to invert the adjustment layer to Control-I. Now it gives us this mask. Now what this does is, remember what I stated before, white, show, black, hide. We want to hide the stars. But of course it's going to partially hide some of the nebulous regions here of the witch head itself of IC2118. I'm fine with that, because if we go back and look at it and just disable it, it is extremely bright on its own. What I am going for here is there is a lot of gorgeous faint signal that is hiding here in the background. There's a lot of this red, there's a lot of nice blue reflection nebulosity that is being pushed through the image, and there's a lot of faint, I guess, IFN data that sits here that I want to really bring out, and that is my goal. So if we go back into the image, so we do a Control-L. Now I want to make some adjustments to this mask, because I am looking to highlight very, very specific regions and hide other regions. I don't want the stars to bloat too much here. That's about right. And then we can further use the output slider. So the output slider is one of my favorite utilities to use when I'm creating masks, because it gives me the ability to, rather than having such a dramatic change here, because I did clip a significant portion of data here to really bring out that faint dust, I want it to be a little bit more uniform. So I just add just a touch here to make it a little bit more gray. That looks okay there. Come back. And you can see that the stars themselves did not bloat because they are masked out, but it brings out all of this faint dust. The problem is, if we re-enable everything, look what it does to the image. All that color data I talked about trying to keep and enhance and preserve, well, we've completely washed it out by doing that. So this is where we start leveraging the opacity tools and utility here, and do it about there. So we can see here's the before and after, before and after. We brought out a lot of the nice little faint dust here in the background without impacting the stars too much. So you can see that the star sizes have remained the same. So the critical point here so far is, and I know that the title has been How do we preserve color? Because as we brighten this image, again, you can see what it's doing. We're impacting what's going on below. So I want to keep a close eye on what I am doing here at all times and making sure that I am not going to lose that color data as I go through and start to enhance all these little cool little galaxies that you can see here that are strewn about the image, these fate LDN and LBN objects that exist, and of course, my favorite part is all the red hydrogen alpha that exists in the background. So we want to keep a close eye on this. The other thing that we want to keep a close eye on, other than the time it's taken for me so far to get to this point in the presentation, is how much noise are we bringing up as we brighten this up. Now, if you take a close look, even with all the changes, the brightening and the saturation I have done, so far the halos look okay around the stars. They are not heavily impacted. Not a whole lot of chrominance noise, luminance noise, because thanks to that Gaussian blur I did early on, we're looking good so far. So you want to, as you make every one of these adjustments, zoom into 300, 400, 500% if you're utterly obsessed like myself, Josh, Eric, Adam, David, and others, to point out a few. Just have a look, keep your eye on it. So that is where we are so far. So I can always go back. If I am not, theoretically, if I am not happy, or I should say not theoretically, hypothetically, if I am not at all happy with the color, I can go back to my shadows and highlights and I can make some adjustment here and boost the color a little bit more. And that is totally up to you. I am so far happy with the color and where it sits because I know once I start getting into the contrast adjustments, that's when you start to see additional enhancements and colors start to come forth. So moving on forward, the next thing that I would like to do is just continuing on with the with this. I want to add a little bit more contrast to the image. Now I can do a curves layer here at this point, and as you can see, I have not at all touched levels through this entire time. I have not clipped any of the data. I do not touch any of that stuff because I'm trying to retain as much information as possible and trying to give myself, because we're all familiar with, and if you're not, it's called ETTR, which is exposed to the right, because the further you expose to the right, the more information that you have, and it gives you a lot more flexibility to make those changes as you move throughout every single one of the steps in this process. I have not made any major changes to the clipping points here, or to the black point, and I haven't clipped that data. So this is the first point where I am going to start making those adjustments using them live. Whoops, that was not supposed to happen like that. So I take a curves adjustment layer in here, and I'm applying it to, as you've noticed, I didn't do it all the way across. So I did it all the way across, and I didn't just apply it to below. And you can if you wanted to. So if I wanted to adjust just the luminance area, you can just do so it only impacts the luminance or the luminosity layer in your image. And you can see the dramatic effect it has. So by making those adjustments to the contrast, it does eliminate, because we've brightened it up ever so slightly, that might be a little much, a lot of the other parts of the image. And of course you can see some destructive issues that are happening if you're as retentive as I am. You've increased the color, sorry, you've increased the contrast, so you brought the brighter areas to the forefront, you've darkened the other areas in the background a little bit, and it helps the nebulosity stand forward. And this is going to ultimately impact your color. But what I like to do here is, in order to retain that color information and to enhance the contrast at the color layer, is that I do it across every single one of the layers. I don't focus just on luminosity. Now it's totally up to you if you want to do that. As I stated, there's a reason why we created a smart object. You can always go back, you can make adjustments. You can add another layer in here if you wanted to do so, such as vibrance or saturation that sits on top, and you can make additional vibrance adjustments if you wanted to do so. So, but one thing that you're going to notice right away is, well, you mask this out to highlight the objects, to keep the stars, and you come back with a curves object, and look what you just did. Because if you take a look at it, what did I do? I bloated my stars. So we can use what I said that we could do in the past here, and of course, it's my luminance image is still retained in memory, so I just pasted it directly in, do a Control-I, come back out, And you can see the adjustments that it's made. The star is still bloated a little bit because I didn't make any additional adjustments to the mask. So we can go back in here with a simple Control L to bring up our levels mask. We clip a little bit, bring this up ever so slightly. Let's go back this way here. All right, I think I'm happy with that mask. Go back in here. Still, it brings it up. It just brings out some of the reflection that's around the star itself, but the core of the star itself does not bloat. So the pinpoint of those stars is retained because we don't want to bloat the stars. We don't want to make them look all fuzzy and gross looking. So, any questions so far? Because I want to hit on a couple of other key things here.
No new questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, I just caught one right here. How did you do your initial stretch of color in RGB? From Josh.
So the initial stretch in RGB was done within PixInsight. You can use a couple of different tools. So you can use the histogram transform tool, or you can use the auto histogram transform tool. I prefer the auto histogram tool, again, because the reason why you have 3 different algorithms that can be selected. There's gamma, logarithmic, and I cannot remember the other one because I never ever use it. And each one of them is going to ultimately impact the contrast of the image itself. So whenever I stretch the 2 images, I try to keep them as equal as possible, try to keep them look at their histograms and try to match them up as closely as possible, so that way I'm not working with wild variations between the 2. And each one of the algorithms is going to impact the image slightly differently. So with logarithmic an auto histogram is not going to give you the most contrast. So you're going to have to end up leveraging what we call is the histogram transform tool, and you end up clipping the black point in every step of the way. So you can apply it across the board to evenly to R, G, and B, or you can go in and you can make the individual changes, so you can brighten up, say, red more than blue, or green, so on and so forth. I tend to leave all the channels linked, break them all together, use histogram to clip the blacks, and then bring it down. And it's an iterative process, so you can then do it again a second and or a third time until you're happy with what the RGB layer looks like. And I do the same thing with illuminance. I tend to use the same number of steps or try to get it as close as possible, and then I carry it in. Now, how dark or how bright you want it, well, again, it's totally up to you, but again, I recommend that you try to keep the image darker, because that way I'm trying to retain as much of the color information in the base that I can as I go through and I'm processing the image and bringing out different things, or as I'm going after different goals, right? That's how I like to do it. There's no right way and or wrong way of doing so. The gamma, I think it's the gamma component, and I'll have to double check, gives you far more contrast than logarithmic transform. And
the other one is the midpoint transform.
Midpoint, thank you. I'm so glad. I knew somebody was going to look it up as I was talking, so thanks for that, man. The other one gives me, so the last one, gamma, gives me far more contrast. Oh, I'm sorry, David, since you have it open, is it gamma the first one or the last one?
I don't have it open, actually. Let me bring it. Gamma is the first one.
Okay, so what is the third one on there?
The third one is the
midpoint.
Midpoint, yeah.
Yes. So midpoint is the one that gives you the highest. Thank you so much for looking at that, because then I would have been completely wrong. Midpoint is the one that gives you the highest amount of contrast in the images, and I tend to not leverage that with the histogram transformation tool within PixInsight. So there's another thing. The other thing that I should touch on is that you have the ability to clip the black pixels using the auto histogram tool right then and there if you wanted to do so. I don't like it because I prefer to see the real-time preview by using the histogram transform function, and it works great for me. Each one of them impacts the stars a little bit differently. Midpoint keeps the stars super pinpoint, very, very tight. It doesn't bloat them out. Sorry, logarithmic does that. Midpoint does not do that. It will allow the stars to bloat somewhat, but it still gives you some nice control. So that's what I like to do. Overly long explanation. So one other thing that we can do here is, and let's just keep talking about color. Now, how do I retain this color? How can I increase the saturation? So as I stated, we can go down here, we can create a vibrance layer if I wanted to, and I can just say boost saturation, and that gives me the ability to boost the saturation. I don't like doing that. You can highlight the RGB layer, and when you do that, you can do a Control L, and this is another one of those destructive things going on. And by doing so, you can adjust the levels here ever so slightly. It might be really, really hard to see on your screens. And holding my spacebar down gives me the ability to give me the little hand and move it around. And it gives me a little boost in the surrounding color here in the nebulosity. It's tough to see on my oops, there we go. Screen. That is one other thing that you can do. Or, as I stated already, you can go back to your color adjustments layer, go back to shadows and highlights, and let's just give it a tiny boost here, and leave it there. So the next step here, what I like to do is we need to add more contrast to the image. So what I like to do is we create what we call is screen soft layer, and it helps me with some really, really dramatic changes. So I want to create a new layer. So we call this one soft. Then I do a stamp visible, so Control Alt Shift E. Then I want to do a Control J to copy that layer. Rename that one to screen. And let's do this. So what I did was when I clicked on curves, hold my Shift key down, select Lum, Control G, got a new group. Let's call this one Loom Adjustment. I'll just call it Adjust. Now we've got a whole new layer up here between these two, so let's change this one over to, you know what, I think I have these backwards, and I do. So we want a screen layer first, so let's call this one, change that one to a screen. Do a Control A, Control C, because we want to copy it. Go down here, create a new mask. Hold down your Alt key, left click to go in, Control V, ta-da, Control I, we have our mask, Control L to bring up the levels, and you make adjustments. Now this isn't going to be 100%. Whoops, perfect. But I want to get it enough so that I'm protecting, and then so I'm not going to bloat everything. So we have it here set to screen. Now you may be wondering, why am I not seeing the changes? Well, because we've got the soft layer here that's set to normal, and it's overriding all the adjustments we made. If I disable it, you can see how much brighter it gets. So if we come into our soft layer now, we set this one to a blending mode of soft. I always lose this soft light. There we go. So you can see the immediate change in the dramatic impact it had. So if we go back and forth between the two, so just by adding the soft layer, look how much more of a change it had on the image. There's so much more contrast. The color has been retained. It's still fairly bright. It's still fairly vibrant. You can make adjustments to each one of these layers if you want to do so. So you adjust the opacity because we don't want it to be too bright. So we'll bring it around, 30-ish% or so. Go up to the soft layer, do the same thing, and to give us around there, let's highlight both of these. Do a Control G. We have a new group. Call it soft. Back and forth, and you can see the dramatic difference it has on contrast and what it does to your color in the background. So that's something you always have to keep in mind as you're doing this. As you increase the contrast within the image, you get to retain a lot of the color information. We're not going to destroy it. We're not doing destructive changes here. So by going back and forth, even though this looked like we had done quite a bit of change to the image, from a contrast point of view, creating that additional screen layer plus soft gives us the ability to, and let's do this. Let's zoom in way in here to bring in a lot of this really nice faint detail that is hiding in the background. Now I can see some of my stars here are getting some of that ugly halo that I just love so much. And you can see, if we take a close look, there's some noise that is starting to come up as we make adjustments as we pass through. So we always want to, as I stated previously, keep a close eye on this one. Keep a close eye on the noise and the luminance layer. Keep a close eye on the chrominance noise. So Control 0 to bring it back. So far, so good. Now I'm going to wrap this up here shortly because I don't want to go through every single step, because if we go back to this image, you can see that I've got a number of other changes that I still need to make. So with that, are there any additional questions before I jump to the next step? Because I'm going to skip a ton of steps. I might show one other one just as a quick trick before I move on.
Don't see any new ones.
Okay, awesome. So far, so good. Hopefully I haven't lost everyone. I speak like the bloody roadrunner, and I apologize for that. So the next thing that I'd like to do is, so as we've gone through a number of these adjustments, so even though I have created a number of different masks to try to protect against star bloat, I still get, you know, this little bloating around some of these stars. It is not too bad. It hasn't impacted the image too negatively in a way, but I still get all freaked out and paranoid about it. So again, create a new layer. So it's Control-Shift-N, and you let's call it highlights. Let's call it reduce highlights. And Control-Alt-Shift-E because it's a stamp visible. Now this is where one of those image adjustment, we get destructive here a little bit. And you can see, of course, because I brought up shadows and highlights, because shadows is already cranked all the way up, it kind of ruins the image. So we just take shadows back to 0. If we go back and forth, there are no changes that are happening. Now what we want to do is focus our efforts on, let's get rid of that, because we own, now we're going to end up making use of the tonal width and the radius here. I want to control the size of these stars, because sometimes, you know, at times I'm pretty good at doing this, sometimes I'm really bad at doing it. And one of the recent comments I've received is, oh, you've kept your stars nice and pinpoint. Well, here's the trick on how to do that. Now, some people may have seen, I think there's a utility that gives you the ability, someone wrote, and it helps you reduce star bloat. And this is all it really does. It's nothing groundbreaking. You can do a couple of different things. You could do a select color range, which will then select every single one of the images, every single one of those pixels that is representative of what you have selected in your image, and then you can expand it, feather it, so on and so forth. I like to do it because I'm targeting very, very few. I'm not targeting the entire image, so I don't need to do a color range or select it in a color range. So you take your highlight amount and you can just mess with it. So if you're looking at it, what it's doing is it is impacting the size of those stars. But of course, you can see that it's reducing the highlights across the entire image too. So what I'd like to do here is get it to the point, so I'm looking at my star sizes here, and let's zoom in and take advantage of zoom. Right there. This is one of the stars that I'm going after. And by taking this highlight adjustments layer, you can see this is where it started. And if you bring it all the way down, you can really crank that star down and get it really pinpoint, get it super tight. You decrease the amount of highlights or lightness that it has, but you retain all the color information. And as you reduce it, one thing that you might notice how the saturation is also coming back. A lot of that color information that was lost because of how bright that was is returning. Now, of course, that presents a whole other issue, such as, well, now you might have this overly bright halo around it. We can control that. So this is typically 85% is exaggerated. I don't like to go that far. So let's see, I think that should be pretty good there. You can use your tonal width, which will then further make adjustments here. So you can see that it also further compresses the highlights around the region if you wanted to do so. And then the radius is just the amount of pixels that will be impacted by the changes that you're making. So I like to keep this around there. So let's do back and forth, back and forth. Cool, select OK, done. So remember, this is now destructive. I could have easily created as a smart object to come back to make changes if I wanted to. It's wholly up to you. For this example, just leave it such as this. Now what I like to do is now I got to create a mask. So if you hold down your Alt key and select this little guy down here, you create a hide all mask. Now to bring in the areas that I wanted to impact, you can just do a brush. So you just hit the B key. Now to change the sizes, you can use the square bracket. So it's right to increase, left to decrease the size. Or you can just always come up here and you can select your brush size as needed and the hardness of your brush. So let's bring it up. Oh, let's make sure over here to our left that we have white selected, which we do. We don't want black because we want to reveal. We don't want to hide. And let's do this. So you can see immediately right away if I before and after, before and after. And let's zoom in so we can really see the change. Use my little hand, and we do it before and then after, before and then after. So like I said, I wanted to be very, very specific on some of the larger stars here. And we want to, and when I do this normally, I zoom in all the way. I want to apply this. Can you guys still hear me? I just got a notification that I'm muted.
We can hear you.
Okay, that was really weird. It just told me that I was muted. So we go through, make sure we select, just get around the size of some of these. That one, actually, whoops, I do this quite a bit. If you hit P, it takes you to the pen. So, and as you can see, what it does, it helps bring back color to a lot of the stars that are bloated too. So I'll hit a few of the stars here, only the brighter ones. I don't go after every single one of them, and this is what I'm doing here, and by not looking at them and zooming in is so wrong. So please do not do this. Zoom in, it takes like 2 seconds for you to do. And if we go back and forth here, you can see all the stars. So 1, 2, 3, 4, those just being the brightest. You can see how they've been reduced and the color has been brought back to them a little bit. The other thing that I like to do is, because we got the proper pronunciation in Arabic is Rugal, is Orion's foot. That's what's causing this beautiful beam of light to come in. I decided to keep him out of the image just for this tutorial. I probably should have brought him in because it would have been awesome to show you how well the highlights and reduction technique here works on these brighter stars to retain, to reduce the amount of highlights, to make it more pinpoint, and it's so much easier to control. What I like to do here is then I go down to my opacity layer. Let's bring this down to about, I don't know, 25, 30% or so. Whoops. And then let's increase the brush size ever so slightly, and then come in here and reduce the impact that he is having on this image here. We're just doing a selective adjustment. And because I've reduced the opacity of my brush, it's not going to be very, very dramatic. Now, if we go into the mask, hold down your Alt key, left click, and you can see how much different it is. We have a white reveal all mask, and then we've got a gray mask, because that is fully based upon my brush size here. So it gives me that ability to add as much reduction. So you can see here before and after. So there's the before, after, before, after. Typically I would do this in an entirely different layer so that way I can refine the mask a little bit further so it doesn't look as sharp and as in your face as it does here. And we can do an Alt if you hold, don't do that. Just simply select the mask, right click, refine mask, and bring this on over. And then what I do is sometimes, just got to feather it just a little bit. And the reason why you got to be careful here, because the size of the masks around the stars are going to wildly differ than the mask that was created around here. So this is, don't do this. Create another layer, and then you can further adjust it. So by doing so, by creating that mask, you can see what it has done, even though we still reduce it, but because we have feathered it so much, it's not as dramatic as a change on the stars. So any questions so far? And then I'm going to wrap this up with one last step about color, and then we'll...
Sean's asking a question, for those using an older version of Photoshop, what steps cannot be done due to not having smart objects?
So that's where it gets fun. So and that's a brilliant question. Now, this is going to be such a humble brag moment. I'm sorry, but I don't use CS2, and I'm assuming that's what this is in reference to. One of the things that, you're going to get destructive with the changes. So one of the things that you can potentially do, since you don't have that ability, is when you go down to your RGB layer, use Control-J and create multiple layers. That won't give you the ability to go back and make the changes real time, unfortunately, but at least you've made that change to multiple different layers and iterations as you go through. So you have the ability to control it that way. That's one way that I'm thinking of, because I've never been put in the position to having to do that, because I've been very fortunate enough to have at least a CS6 here in my possession. If there are any people here in the live room that know of a way better, please, by all means, beak up, I'm more than happy. But that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head, Sean. Sorry, might not be the best answer in the world. So with that, let's do a quick, let's flatten this image and move on to what we call as lab. Okay, great, thanks, Sean. Oh, I love that new feature about it. That's awesome. It shows you the chat right above the user's name here in the window. Great. So let's flatten the image because we want to move into the lab color space. The lab color space is probably one of my favorite utilities here because it gives you the ability to really target specific areas. So what we have to do is, unfortunately, we got to flatten the image. So to flatten the image, we do a Control-Shift-Echo for E, and we're it's going to just take the name. That's totally fine. We flatten the image, brought it all together. We go to Image Mode, go into Lab Color Mode here, and we can go into Channels, and you can see that it's broken up into a lightness layer, an alpha, and blue layer. So each one of these is going to be representative of different colors that it is going to be used against. So I don't have to select a particular adjustment layer here if I don't want to, so I can just keep them all selected, go back into here. Just want to show you guys what it looks like. So you could do a Control-M, yes. So Control-M brings up the curves adjustment layer. Select the layer that you want to go for. Now this is where you can do additional, you can add additional vibrance and brightness to your image. What I like to use is, so your A's and your B's are going to target different ones. And if I remember correctly, it's reds versus blues and yellows here. Reds and greens versus blues and yellows. Since this image has a lot of red in it and has a lot of blue, I want to highlight some of the reds in the background. So I just add a simple control point here. So we select the A channel, select a control point. Let's see if I can nail this one with one shot. Ah, close. Here we go. Back to 0. We want to make an adjustment to this image. Now, you can do this as a separate layer, as an adjustment layer, add a mask, so that way you're only targeting specific ones. And that's what I did in my original image. I actually created a mask out of this one. And you can just make some slight changes here, and make sure you add the same on the other side. Now, what you may have seen is there's the before, and there's the after. The before and the after. You can see all the reds in the background were immediately targeted, and they were brightened up. We can select the blue if you want to, set a control point, and bring out the blues. The blues are going to be far more dramatic. I don't like to do this. This is way over the top, but it's just giving you guys and girls, of course, an indication of what other tools can be leveraged. So we go back and forth here between the two. You can see the changes to the blues and the reds. They're huge. Select OK. It's automatically applied. Now if we go to Image, Adjustments, and then, whoops, Image Mode, RGB color, bring it back. Now if we wanted to make changes to the individual colors, you can create a selective color layer. This gives us the ability to target very specific colors. Now I don't like what's happened to the red down here. It is just way over the top. I can't stand it. It's a little too burnt out, and I've lost some of the detail that I want to retain. Now, because this is an FSQ, and of course, sorry, a 16803 chip, you might notice that the stars are a little bloated because they're completely out of focus because of what we call tilt and how much I hate this setup at times. So I want to make some changes here. So we can impact just the red by doing this. So if we go back and forth, what I'm doing is I'm brightening up the red layer. Now let's go out here, do this before and after, before and after. So we can reduce this just a little bit because I do want to retain the color. I don't want to reduce too much of the black here. Before and after, before, after. I like that. I like that where that sits. Now you can make additional adjustments here if you wanted to. So if we wanted to decrease cyan, so you can see what happens there, it comes a little bit more vibrant of a red. Some people love magenta, so you can add magenta and you can, again, all that lightning I just did, well, I just added it back in by making it a little bit brighter. You can just do some yellow. Yellow will completely change it. Either makes it more orange or it makes it more magenta if you want to do so. So I don't want to make those changes there. Leave this here and here. Take a look at it. Now, the problem is it's at impacting everything else. I only want to impact very specific areas. So if I go in here and I select the mask, this is one way of doing it. This is the ultimate crazy lazy way of doing it. Hold down your Alt key, left click, Control I. It's now a hidden mask. All those changes are now gone. They're hidden. Use your brush, so B for brush. Make sure you have your mask selected. select your size, and brilliant, I forgot to change the opacity here. And now I'm really careful with how I use this brush. So you go in and you select the areas that you want. Now, if there are any red stars down here, they will be impacted by doing this. We select the image, right-click, refine mask, go to feather, bring it out. And I always do a very heavy feather here. I rarely, if ever, do a very small one because it's going to be fully dependent upon the size of the area that you're brushing out. So it's about right there. I like that. So that way we can reduce the impact there. And we can create another adjustment layer here. And now we can just target the blue. So we change this to a blue. And now I want to go after the blues that are in here, in this part of the image, because they're a little too dark in my opinion. So we can either add more yellow, which would really highlight the blue, or we can decrease it so slightly. We don't want to go too far because now you can see it's turning green. So we want to just be really careful here with the adjustments that we make. And again, black point's going to make it darker, and we can little changes, people. That's one of the things we need to, you don't exaggerate, you don't need to exaggerate to make the changes. So if we go back and forth here, not sure if you can see it on your screen, so Control Plus brings us right in, the space bar down. There's before and after, before, after. So it lightened it up ever so slightly. And again, we can just do a simple Control I to invert the mask, use your brush, and you can just brush in the areas that you want to impact. Now, typically, I would not be this careless. You would create the proper mask because I don't want to impact. Here, I don't want to remove all of that great color information out of them as well. We don't want to destroy them. And then one final refine mask, feather the heck out of it, and go OK. And voila. So this is where we started. Let's go all the way back in our history. Open. I would not consider this a final image, not at all, and this is where we ended up. And then with a few more steps, this is where you can really end up. Far brighter, far more vibrant, because this is what I like. Anyhow, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If there are any questions, more than happy to take them right now. So thank you very much, everyone, for sitting and listening.
Thank you, Hytham. Josh is mentioning adjust contrast in lab mode on the B&A channels, and that's actually a technique I'm not sure I've tried.
Yeah, I haven't used that myself either. I like to do the contrast just back here in this layer. You can do it just on the luminance layer if you wanted to. I don't use it very often, if at all. Josh, did you just want to talk about how you use it?
Yeah, I mentioned it back when you were in lab mode, but you can do similar things to boosting the colors in lab mode by increasing the contrast in your AMD channels to bring up the reds and blues some.
Yeah, that definitely works too. The other thing that you can do here is, you can just go back into here and you can do something like, whoa, there are so slight adjustments here. Typically you want to do that in before I changed it over, so that way you can just boost your colors. You could do a levels adjustment too to really target very specific areas. You don't want to do it across your spectrum, but you could do it here on the individual. This is much smarter. So you can see that, by clipping, I'm reducing the reds, or by bringing in your midtones here, you can see how much more red has been added, and I've only moved it up about 4 points, 3 points. That's the other way of doing it, so you can target the individual colors that way. Or like Josh said, you could do it by using it in lab mode and targeting the specific channels.
Awesome presentation. Very cool. Nice seeing the image develop, and I always say it, the blues to me seem to make an image, and that's one that the overwhelming blues are just kind of rich. And
yeah, that's one of the things that surprised me in this area when I first started to process it. Was I was completely taken aback by the amount of blue, and immediately you start to question yourself and you go, wait a minute, I haven't seen this in other images. Am I wrong? What did I mess up? Was it an improper DBE? Was it, what did I mess up? But I did some reading about IC2118, and it's because it is a reflection nebula, as most of us know, and it's also thought to be to contain an extremely high amount of carbon monoxide. It's also very rich in carbon monoxide, which would lead to that it is a stellar nursery. Yeah, it was really cool. I did a ton of reading about it, so it just kind of blew my mind at how little I knew.
Yep. And Sean is thanking you as well. Now he has to redo all of his interviews. Doing it wrong.
Well, you know what, dude? I go back and I constantly redo them, and like I said, whoops. So just to go open this back up, let's go to single pane here, NGC7023, which is son of a gun. And you'll notice, see how many times I redo it? I've actually deleted it. I tend to go back, and those usually take 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 if I ever get bored and I go back and take a look at them. Let's go to flat, and let's see if I hit the right one. Hey, oh, I did. All right. And like I said, so that other image, the IC2118, had unbelievable amounts of integration, 18 hours, whereas this one here is, like I said, 30 minutes a piece, and I use the exact same technique here in this image to develop this color. So you don't need a lot. It's just how you go about doing it, what to keep an eye out for. And again, like a lot of mistakes here because I first started using it, the stars are bloated. Just a matter of keeping track, watching it, watch every single step of the way, make adjustments as you go along, and it works. It's pretty neat. Learned it all in landscape photography. Had nothing to do with astrophotography. Any other questions?
The last I see in here, let me check out in Q&A. I do not see any other questions in Q&A. So
cool, great.
Well, thank you, Hytham, for presenting. Next week is Astronomical Seeing by Gaston Baudat from Innovations Foresight. And that is going to be a technical discussion, but also really interesting if you really care about seeing and want to find a way to use your knowledge of seeing and making your images better. So without going any further, I want to again thank Hytham, and guys, we will see you next week. Have a good one.